Hi everyone, it's Jeanette here from the Sewing Studio. Welcome to another tutorial, which today I've hopefully got some inspiration for you. Now this is a little bit of a follow-on from when we were doing our 4-patch blocks, because while I was looking into those, there were some other uses for 4-patches that I came across, and I thought, oh well, I'll just sort of put them to one side, but we thought it'd be really nice if we put those into a little video. So I suppose today is 4 more 4-patch block uses. That's a little bit of a tongue twister. So I'm going to start with this one here, and I've been raiding my 2.5-inch scrap box, because one of the reasons I spoke about in the first video about why I'm doing this is because I needed to use up some of my 2.5-inch squares. What I do, and I've said before, what I do when I'm cutting, if I've got a little bit of fabric left, if I can get one or a couple of 2.5-inch squares out of it, I will, and then they go into this box. And I purposely keep this a very small box, and as soon as it gets full, I start to use some of those up. And I don't open or start a second box, it's use up what's in there. So these blocks, these whole 4-patch blocks came about from the need to utilise some of those, but also because I wanted to do some charity quilts for Project Linus UK, and I was thinking actually 4-patch blocks are really good leader and ender projects when I'm sewing that I can sort of do as bonus blocks in between other sewing, and perhaps those could then go for charity or comfort quilts. So that was the reason behind why I started down this whole rabbit hole. Now, luckily, I've not gone too deep into the rabbit hole for the 4 patches, but we've now got 10, 4 more today and the 6 we did originally. So the first one I'm going to start with is this one, and this is a variation of the frayed 4-patch. Now, I don't actually know what this block is called. I just refer to it as a variation to a frayed 4-patch. Let me put it down under the close-up so you can see. But basically, the difference is, with a frayed 4-patch, you have 4 2.5-inch squares in the corners. Now, on this one, you only have 2, and you then complete that row with an extra long strip. So let me just move that there, and let's just lay out. I've got the pieces here. The other thing I will say is I've chosen to make the diagonal row of the 4 patches on this one in the light fabric, because I thought actually that will stand out really well in the quilt and make a really strong chaining effect, but in the light coloured fabrics. So that's what I'm doing on there, and I thought red, white and blue is always a good patriotic one to do. So to lay out, we are just going to take this. So we need 4 light 2.5-inch squares, and these are all random. You can see I've just gone scrappy. These have come out of my box. So I'm going to put 4 lights like that, and then I've got my 2 coloured fabrics. So for me, that's blue and red, and I'm going to put one there and one there. Let's get rid of that, those little bits of fabric. And then on here, 2 4.5 by 2.5, and they're going to lay underneath. And then 4.5, 2.5 again in the red, and you can see I've got different coloured reds going on. I'm going for a scrappy block, using up all my bits and pieces, odds and ends of 2.5-inch strips. And then I've got another 2.5 by 6.5 in the blue and a 2.5 by 6.5 in the red. So that's how the block goes. And we're just going to put the centre together first in our 4-patch. So I'm going to fold right onto left. I'm just going to put a pin in that while I take it to the machine, and then right onto left for that one. You can see these have been in my scrap box because all the threads start coming off the edges. And we're going to take and sew 1/4 inch and put this 4-patch together, and then I'll join the 2 rows together while we're at the sewing machine. So now we've got our 2 separate bits, we'll just put them together, and I'm just going to finger press the seam towards the contrast, the dark coloured fabrics. And then we're just going to squeeze those seams together, and I can feel that's nice and flat there. So I'll just put a pin to hold it. And then we'll just put together our 4-patch block. Now, even though I've pinned it, I will just say I still like to take that out and just check that is still exactly where I want it. So there's our 4-patch block, and it goes in like that. Let me just, now you can open that seam, or I'm just going to finger press that open for the minute. We'll do it properly when we take it to the iron at the end. But that seam doesn't need to match anything. So where I've got a seam that doesn't need to match, I tend to press open. They tend to lay a bit flatter. So that's how that one's going to go back into the block. Now the order we sew this, we want to put these 2 short 4.5-inch pieces on. Then we're going to attach these white squares to the ends of those. So let me just pin those. That one. And if I pin that one on, so the 2 short pieces first, and then once we've got those squares on, we'll sew the 2 long sides together. I'm going to go crazy and put 2 pins in. I'll just take that one to the machine, and then we can put the whole thing together. So I'm just going to finger press those seams again out towards the darker fabrics. And then this red one is going to go like that. So just continuing on our chain. Now because that seam's pressed that way, we'll press that seam towards the red. And then that seam there will lock. And that's the only seam you have to nest there. So we'll start there. I think this seam's actually long enough that I don't need to start on a starter piece. So making sure we continue our chain, we're going to put that piece in, and then our block will be done. So I've just taken that block to the iron and given it a press, and it's come out really nice, flat, patriotic but scrappy block. So that, as I said, that's the variation of the frayed 4-patch. It probably does have a name. If you know the name of it, let me know, because I've no idea. I've always known it, like I say, the variation of the frayed 4-patch. So that's our first block. Now the next one is a block that we've already covered, but I couldn't not do a 4-patch series and not include a star block. And this is one of my favourites, where I use 4 patches in the centre, and it's the Sawtooth Star. As I said, I absolutely love star blocks and I love 4 patches, so the combination of the two, marriage made in heaven. So that's that one. Now we've actually got a full tutorial on how we make that block and a project. We actually did a table runner with that one. So if you want to have a look at that, we'll leave a link in the description so you can go and have a look. But basically this is made up of our 4-patch centre, and then we make flying geese, and then we have, so they would be 2.5 by 4.5, because that would be a 4.5-inch finished, and then we have 4 2.5-inch squares that we put in the corner. And you can see on this one, I've used the same 4 colours, but I've paired the colours into the star points, so we get sort of a bit more of a coordinated look rather than really scrappy. But these come out really, really nice, even if they're scrappy. Any Sawtooth Star block gets a first prize in my book, so that's the 4 patch in the centre of a sawtooth star. Now the next block, I feel I've cheated a little bit with this one, but technically it is a 4 patch. And I've gone tiny. I'm going to put it under the close-up because I've gone quite small in this because I was using up my little bits of scraps and not necessarily the bits out of my 2.5-inch bin. And I've been making these little tiny bow tie block. So this is a bow tie block, and I'll come on to some, actually let's do them all like that, some layouts in a minute because we've got some different options for layouts. So these use 2 inches. 2-inch squares, but like I say, technically it is a 4-patch block, but as I said, it's a block within its own right, and we just snowball these corners, but it is sort of a little bit of a glorified 4-patch. So let me show you how I made these, and let me bring in these tiny little pieces. Now I will say, if you struggle with little pieces, if you size up to a 2.5, you know, you don't have to go dinky. And 2 inches, it's just fiddly. So if you haven't got the dexterity in your fingers, now I'm getting to the age where I haven't got the same dexterity as I used to. So, you know, you'll quite often see me here fiddling with fabrics, trying to sort of get to grip on them. And I found these a little bit fiddly, but doable. You just have to take your time. But if you find this is too small, size up to 2.5. So 4 2.5-inch squares, and on these, some of these I've used the same fabric to make the bow tie, and on some of them I've used a contrast, and it doesn't really matter because these are using my scraps, so it works either way. So 2-inch squares, 2 in the background, 2 in your colour, and then you want 2, and these is where it starts getting a little bit fiddly. These are sized at 1 1/4, and these are going to go onto the corners like that to form our bow tie. So I'm just going to grab myself a ruler and a pen and draw a line on the back of these little squares. If you're using 2.5-inch squares, the size of this little corner square, I would use a 1.5-inch rather than a 1 1/4. And we're just going to draw the line corner to corner, and this is where fabric's upside down. I'll just have to watch that when I take this. Is a white on white, and it's really hard to see. Yeah, if you've got a white on white, put it against something dark and you'll see which is the front and which is the back. So we're going to take these to the sewing machine, we're going to sew them, but just slightly to the outside edge, so slightly to the right. So just sort of about touching, I'll probably have the needle as best I can touching that outside edge of that line. So while I'm here at the sewing machine, I'm just going to carry on. Now I'm just going to check that I'm happy that that has covered that corner, and it has, so I can trim away this excess, and I'm just going to do it with my scissors. Not the best scissors in the world because these are my snips rather than my big scissors, but it's only a small seam. And I'm going to press the seam so it goes under the darker fabric. And then I'm going to bring in our other 2 pieces here and lay out the block so it's going to look like that. I'm definitely going to start on my starter scrap because these are very small. I'm actually going to sew that one from the other side. I think it'll be easier. So now we can open these out, press towards the darker fabric, and then put our little 4-patch together. Hold on. This is where I become angrily challenged again. Have I done that right? Yes. It only ever happens here. It's like I can't see the angles. So there's our little block. Now I've got my centre quite well nested there, but if you haven't, because there's coloured fabric there, you can quite often get away with that, so don't worry. Now this is such a small block. This actually comes out at 3.5, so 3-inch finished. So when I put 4 of these together, I'll have a 6-inch finished block. Now my top tip is press that middle seam open. These are quite small, and even on a bigger, even if I was doing 2.5-inch squares, I would press that seam open. And then that block will lay nice and flat. So then we've got this lovely, let me put it here under the close-up, we've got this lovely dinky little bow tie block. So as promised, let me just quickly show you some settings for this. Now we can do it so that they're all just, actually let's do it like that, like a 4-patch. All facing in the same direction. We could have some coming so they're coming together like that. We can do something I call circle the wagons. That's not the official title for it, that's just how I see it in my head when I'm doing this, and that's just having them all going so that they're forming a circle. Or we can have it so that all the bow ties come into the centre and it gives like a cross effect. So that's 3 of our more uses for 4 patches blocks done. So let me move those out the way and bring in the 4th and final one. And this uses 2 4-patch blocks, but then in our double 4-patch, we had just single squares of fabric. Now in this one, we put a triangle, and this forms a jewel box. This is a jewel box block, and you can just use this one single block put it together in different ways to make a jewel box quilt, which always looks absolutely stunning. And it's not a quilt I've made yet, and I've always wanted to for a very, very, very long time, and I'm lucky enough to be able to do that next year. In one of the quilt groups I belong to, I belong to 2 quilt groups here locally, and we do a group, what we call a group quilt, where we all make the same quilt. We all do it different sizes. Some people just do a cushion, some people will do a king-size quilt. But it's going to be jewel box. 2024 is going to be the year I get to do a jewel box quilt. I've yet to decide on the fabric. Now this actually is a block from another quilt that I'm making, which is a sampler quilt, and it's just one of the blocks that was in that. So just your 2 half-square triangles and 2 4-patch blocks. This block is actually a 9-inch, so it will finish. This is 9.5 at the moment. It will finish at 9 inches. So these squares were actually 2 3/4. And the half-square triangle units are 5 inches. But if I was going to use my 2.5-inch box, these half-square triangles would be 4.5, because my 4-patch would come out at 4.5. So that is, watch this space. We may come back to that at some point in the future to see how my jewel box quilt for my quilting group turns out for 2024. So that was our 4 uses for 4 patches, or 4 more uses for 4 patches. Now, doing all of those 10 4-patch uses has left me with a little bit of a problem, that I'm completely inspired and motivated, and I want to make quilts with all of them, but of course I can't. There isn't enough hours in the day for me to do quilts in all of them. So aside from the jewel box, which I will be doing with my local quilt group, I would like your help in deciding what other 4-patch quilt I should make from the blocks that we've demoed, either from this video or from the first one. So if you have a preference, please leave a comment in either of those 2 videos and we will see it, and it will just be a simple case of whichever one gets the most votes, that's the quilt I will make with that particular block. So thank you very much. I hope you've enjoyed that. I hope you've been a little bit inspired to give a 4-patch a go if you haven't already. Particularly if you're a beginner quilter, they're really easy and it's a nice starter-friendly one for you to do. So thank you very much. If you've already made any 4-patch quilts, please do share your photos with us. We like to see what you're doing, but also, more importantly, it gives other people inspiration of what they could be doing with their 4-patches. So thank you ever so much. Thanks for joining me today, and I hope to see you again soon here in the sewing studio.